In this video, we're going to be building a testimonials grid, and we're going to be doing it with a mobile-first responsive design solution, and we're also going to be using Flexbox. Now, this is part of my full stack web developer roadmap series. You can learn more about that up here or in the description. But in prior videos of this series, we've gone through the basics of JavaScript and then HTML and CSS, and more recently we've gotten into things like responsive design and Flexbox, a little bit more advanced CSS. My goal in this video is to not only solve this challenge on Frontend Mentor, but also to apply those skills that we've learned in previous lessons so that you can really start to use them in the real world. Lastly, I'm going to be adding in a few extra pieces to the puzzle. So throughout this series, we have been using CodePen, which is just a nice environment where we have HTML, CSS, and JavaScript all in one place, all hooked up and ready to go. Since this challenge is relatively straightforward, and you'll see as we walk through it, I want to also add in the concept of a code editor. So we're going to be downloading and using Visual Studio Code, and then we're also going to be doing a little bit of version control. And I'm not going to get super detailed into it quite yet, but I'm going to show you the commands that you have to run to get your design pushed up to GitHub and deployed to the GitHub pages so that you can, share a URL with others of what you built. But don't worry, the only prerequisites that you really need are going to be HTML, CSS, and make sure you've watched my Flexbox and responsive design videos. Let's get started. If we come up to Frontend Mentor, this is the challenge that we are going to be creating. And I've already started it, so I don't need to click here. So let me go to my challenges, or I guess profile, my challenges, and then testimonials grid section. So from here, you can download the starter files. So we'll do that. It's going to pop up on another screen for me. So once you've downloaded your files, make sure that you have Visual Studio Code downloaded. It's just a code editor. And I actually made a whole video on code editors. You can check it out up here of which ones I recommend and why. So obviously Visual Studio Code would be one of those. So go ahead and download that. And once you've downloaded it, open up a brand new window. From here, you're going to want to click File, open a folder, and then go find the testimonial challenge starter pack that you just downloaded. So I've got it selected, and this is going to open me up into the workspace. As we start looking at the starter files, if you open up index.html, which is what we're going to actually be working on, you can see that there's all sorts of text already in here, and luckily we have a lot of the testimonials that we will need. They're not really implemented in HTML elements, but it's good to just have this text ready to go. Now, just to relate this back to what we've been using with CodePen, this index.html is basically the same as this HTML box here in CodePen. It's just on our local computer. It's in our local file system rather than up in the cloud. Now your first question is probably, well, how do we actually view this HTML document in the browser? Now remember, HTML and CSS, they are only displayed in the browser, therefore we need a web browser to look at this. The way that we do that is you actually have a couple options. I'll show you the most bare bones option first, and then we'll go into what we're actually going to be using to solve this challenge. To view an HTML document in the browser, all you have to do is go to your File Explorer. I'm on Windows, but this works the same on Mac or Linux. And just go to the folder that you have it saved in, and then find the index.html file. You'll notice that it does not say index.html as you see over here. And that is because the file type over here is Chrome HTML document, so it doesn't display it here in the name. If you right-click and go down to Open With, you can choose a browser to open it in. So I might just say Google Chrome, and when we click that, it should have opened it up if I go back to my browser, it should open it up in Google Chrome. And there's a lot of text here, and that's because we have to actually implement this design, but this is the HTML document that we're looking at. And you can see up in the URL bar, we're actually looking at our local C drive. Now on Mac and Linux, this is going to look a little bit different, but it's the same concept. It's just the local path to that file displayed in the browser. Now I'm going to point out a few things here that might be interesting to you. The first thing, you see this little icon up here in the top left portion of the tab. This is a little Frontend Mentor logo or favicon. And you might be wondering, well, how did that get there? Well, the way that we put that there is if we come back to our files and we look at this link tag right here. This is actually putting in that favicon up into the title. Here's some metadata about it, some sizing, but here's the really important attribute, which is the href. And what we've passed in is a relative path. We'll learn a lot more about absolute and relative paths coming up when we start working in the terminal a little bit more. But all this is saying is I want to look relative to the current directory into the images folder over here, and then drop that down and grab me the favicon 32 by 32 PNG, and we can open that up and see the little icon that we have, and that matches the icon that we see up in the tab. Furthermore, in the index.html, we've got the doc type. That's important for just HTML boilerplate. And then I'm actually going to indent this for us so that we can see it a little bit better. We have the head tag, which is pretty standard for an HTML document. Here are some meta tags that help with displaying the site in the browser properly. These are just pretty standard defaults that you might put in. And then, of course, the link we just talked about. Now, the title tag, this is where we actually name the tab that it's going to open in. So we can change this and just say, instead of Frontend Mentor, we can just say Testimonial Challenge. And when we click Save, open the browser up and click Refresh, you'll see that it changed to Testimonial Challenge. Right here we have some styles. We haven't really been looking at this, but if you come back to our browser and go to CodePen, the CSS right here, there's a couple ways that you can link that up. You can actually use a link tag to link up styles, or you can just put them all in a style HTML tag right here. Now, we're not going to do that because that's not very good practice for a good amount of CSS. You want to break it out into a separate file, which is what we're going to do. So we'll delete all of that. We don't need it. And then finally, we have all of this text, which is basically, if we look at the challenge itself, I wish there was a better way to see this. Oh yeah, we actually have the design here. So if we go to the desktop design, you'll see that we have all of the text, and all this text is right here. I'm going to cut this out, and then I just want to make a new file, so I just right-clicked over here in the file pane, click New File, and we'll just say placeholder text.txt. So if we give it the .txt file extension, it's just a plain text document. We can paste that in and save it just so that we have it, but it doesn't clutter up our HTML. This last part, the attribution, this is just, as we look at it in the browser, it's just this little piece down here. So you can, if you want to, you can go ahead and fill this out and link to whatever you want to, your Twitter account, your LinkedIn account, your GitHub account, whatever you want to do. I'm going to delete it here. I don't really want to clutter up anything. I want to just focus on the challenge itself. So at this point, we have a basic HTML boilerplate. And I'll actually show you a shortcut to get to pretty much exactly this with just a few keystrokes. Let's save this. I'll right-click, create a new file, and we're going to call this test.html. because we're just going to be testing a few things. Within this document, I'm going to show you how to use Emmet. And what Emmet is, if we open it up, this is built into Visual Studio Code. And what you basically can do with it is type shorthand, characters and click tab, and it will extend it out into a code snippet of what you want already. So let me just give you a brief example. If we wanted in this HTML document, you can see Visual Studio Code has identified in the bottom right that this is an HTML document. So if I type H2, it's going to pull up this box that says Emmet abbreviation, and you can click it to see what it's going to abbreviate to, but really all you have to do is click tab, and it's going to extend it out into the element that you want, and you can just start typing. Similarly, we can actually get this entire HTML boilerplate in just a few keystrokes. So if you type HTML, and we have a couple options here, and you can go through and see exactly what it's going to create. So basic HTML will just give you the main tag. We want something a little better than that. Oops, I already did it on accident. The HTML5, let's go ahead and see what HTML5 gives us. It's going to give us pretty much everything we want here, just like we saw earlier. And then finally, HTML, XML. This is not something that you're probably going to use very often. So if we just click HTML5 or scroll to it with our arrow keys and press tab, it's going to break us out into this boilerplate, which is very similar to what we were set up with when we downloaded the starter files for our Frontend Mentor Challenge. So that's just a handy way to create this, and then of course you can change the title. I don't think there's a link tag for the favicon set up by default, but you've got all the meta tags that are necessary, and you're all set. As we go through this challenge, I'm going to be using those Emmet snippets, and I'll try to mention it as we go along, but just know that that's going on. For now, I'll delete the test file. We don't need that any longer. And now let me show you our workflow. So what we could do is just write some HTML, so H2 tab, and then some title. That's just basic HTML, and click save. And then we can Alt tab or switch back to the browser, open up the tab that we have it on and click refresh, and you'll see the new HTML document. This would be very cumbersome, and it's not a great way to make everything fast. So what we're going to do is we're going to split the screens here, and I'm going to put the Visual Studio Code on the left and the Testimonial Challenge on the right. Now obviously we don't have a lot of room here, so you can always click this right here to collapse that. Might make this a little bit smaller for us. And then when we're working with our dev tools, we'll click Inspect. We're in Chrome right now. You can use Firefox as well if you want. Since we've got these side by side, I'm going to actually redock all of this stuff to be at the bottom. So I can do that. Let me remember where I can do that. Let's click. There we go. You click these three little dots and click this dock to bottom. So now we have a much wider screen to work with. And as you resize this, in the top right corner, you can see what screen size you have. Or you can click the toggle device toolbar, and now we can see it more explicitly, where we can resize the screen up here. So this is probably going to be the better option for us. And we can change the zoom to, let's say, be 75% so that we can see it a little bit better. And let me zoom out just a tiny bit. We don't need the JavaScript console because we're not working with JavaScript, so we can close that drawer. And now all we have is the elements here on the left, so the HTML, and then the styles on the right, or the CSS. And if we click this Select an Element button and we select that H2, we can locate it within the HTML document and then see the relevant styles down here. So that's going to be our workflow, and as we go through this, we can just add new elements, some text, click save, come over here and click refresh. And now you see it's been added to the document. Now there's just one more thing that I want to do, and it's just going to make this whole workflow just a little bit nicer. We're going to come into the extensions piece. Let me just expand this out for us. We'll go to the extensions tab within Visual Studio Code, and let's type in live server. Now, live server is a way that we can get automatic updates every time we click save on our HTML and CSS documents. So let's install this. It's very easy to install extensions in Visual Studio Code. So you can see it's installed. I think that's all we need to do. So this is just another tab that's been opened up. Let's close it. We don't need it. We'll close this out as well. And then all we have to do to get this live server working is come down to the bottom right of our screen and click the Go Live. And it's going to pop up a security box. You need to allow access. And now what you'll see is that we've got a different address. This is actually, we'll get into this a lot more later in the series, but 127.0.0.1, that's our local host. And then 5501 is the port that we're serving it on, and we're serving the index.html document. Now, if we put these next to each other, close this out, and add another, piece of text. So more text, and once we click save, you'll see that it immediately gets updated here in the browser. That's going to be incredibly handy for us. We don't have to go back and forth clicking refresh every time, and it's also really nice because instead of going to your file folder and right clicking and opening with a browser, you can just do it directly from Visual Studio Code. I know that was a very long kind of introduction to get us started working on this project, but as I've been trying to do within this full stack series is just take you through every single step. So we're not leaving anything out. We're going through absolutely everything. And that's why I wanted to show you the extensions, the Emmet abbreviations, the favicons, the meta tags, all of these little details, because as I was learning, I always wondered about them, and oftentimes tutorials would just skip right over them. But we are finally ready to start the actual challenge and start building that testimonials grid. The very first thing I'm going to do, and this is what you should always do, is link up your CSS document. If I open the File Explorer, you'll see that there is no CSS available to us yet because we haven't created it. So go ahead and right click, create a new file, call it styles.css or whatever you want it, doesn't really matter. This is just a convention. Once you have styles.css, let's just go ahead and put in a basic style. So we'll use the wildcard that selects all elements, and we'll give it a color of red. And the reason we do this is just to, verify that everything is working correctly. When we click save, you'll notice nothing happens here. And the reason nothing happens is not because our live server's not working, it's because we haven't told the index.html document that we need to grab that style sheet. So let's use an Emmet abbreviation. We'll type link, and you can see all sorts of different links that you can use. And if we go down to CSS, click tab, you'll see that we have a CSS link set up for us. And since we are in the same directory, so index.html and styles.css are in the same directory, we can just use this exactly. So it's saying style.css, and just to stay with convention, I actually think it should be style, not styles. Let's just rename it to style.css over here, and then save the HTML document. You'll see that immediately the text color updated to be red. So we know that our link to our style.css is working. If you put in, something like styles.css and click save, not going to work anymore. So that's what's going on there with that link tag. And for those of you who have been following along with the series, if we come to CodePen, what we just did there was we hooked up the CSS and the HTML. By default, when you're in CodePen, you can just type HTML and type CSS and they work together. But when you're not working in CodePen, which honestly most of the time as a developer you won't be, you have to actually come in and link them up with the link tag. Alright, so let's get started here on the layout. We'll close the file pane for just a second, and if you look at the desktop design, you'll see that we'll have to kind of flip back and forth. Or what we can do is we can split these editors. So I believe we can split down And now we can close this top one, and we have the index.html at the top and our desktop design at the bottom. It's kind of small, but it will at least give us a general feeling for what kind of layout we need. If you're like me and get kind of annoyed with all this text flowing off the screen, just click View, toggle Word Wrap, and then everything wraps to our view. I kind of like that, so we'll go with that. And to start us off, let's see what we're dealing with here with the grid. So the first step to solving any HTML and CSS challenge, or just building a web app in general, is to get the layout correct. And we saw that in previous lessons and challenges that we did, where we just put a border on each of our div containers, and then we did the layout, and then we filled in all of the content and styles. So we're going to do the exact same thing here, and you'll see it's not going to be all that complicated. Now, the most obvious place to start, if we make this a little bigger, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 containers, and they all have slightly different styles. It looks like the 2 white containers here may have the exact same style, but for now, let's just give them all a unique ID so that we can select them with CSS a little bit easier. So to do that, with Emmet abbreviations, you can actually just type the hashtag and then whatever ID you want to give it. I'm just going to number these, so we'll say testimonial-1 and then click tab, and you see what it does is it gives an ID attribute on a div. So that's what by default, if you use the Emmet abbreviations to put a hashtag and then type something, or if you put a dot and then type something and press tab, it will give you a class. So that's just a quick shortcut. So we'll go through and we'll do the same thing here. So we'll say testimonial-2. And then another useful thing in Visual Studio Code, if you go to the end of a line, click Control-C to copy, and then Control-V, it will just paste them down. So there's our 5, and then we can come in here and give this a 3, a 4, and a 5. So we now have all of the containers that we need. When we click Save, everything's going to disappear up here because we just have empty div containers. That's okay for now. The next thing that I'm looking at here, normally I just put a border on everything and make a layout, but this is already kind of a grid, and we might as well start filling in the colors as backgrounds so that we can see what we're dealing with. And then additionally, we probably need to start looking at the mobile design because we're doing this mobile first. So I know this is going to clutter the screen up a little, but let's go ahead and open up the mobile design in the bottom part here. Close this back out. And here you'll just see that every card is going to be stacked directly on top of each other, but they're going to look relatively similar. So here's the desktop, here's the mobile. It looks like on the mobile design, the cards themselves for the grid items or testimonials are going to be the height of the content. So the items with more content are going to be taller than the ones with less. So probably the best way to lay this out at the beginning is to just grab some of this content and put a background on there and just start getting the structure of everything. So let me pull this down. I know that's really small, but we'll work with it. And here in testimonial number 1, I'm just going to put a small amount of content because I don't want our HTML document getting super busy with a bunch of text yet, because that'll take away from the concepts we're trying to learn here. So let's go to the placeholder text, and maybe we'll just grab this really short line of text and we'll put that in a paragraph tag. So we'll just copy it there and click Save. We still have red text. I don't really want that. So let's replace this all selector. Instead of color red, we'll do box sizing border box, because that's our basic CSS reset that we want to do. We want to set all box sizing to border box. So now we got the right text and all of our box sizing is good. Let's resize the screen so that we actually have the browser on the right mimicking a mobile device. So this isn't perfect. I don't know, this is probably not exactly a mobile device. Let's make it even a little bit smaller. Gives us more room to type anyways. But this is close enough, and this is what we're gonna build our mobile design off of. As we talked about in the responsive design video, 576 pixels is kind of our standard mobile device. So anything 576 or below is going to be considered mobile. So that's roughly what we're looking at here. And if you right click and inspect, and then you click this little icon right here to get the full screen, you should be able to see exactly how wide it is. So if we just typed window.inner width, we're at 584. So if we wanted to hit that 576 number or a little bit lower, it'd be right about here. So we'll keep the screen size right here for now, and then as we go up to the desktop design, we'll make it a little bit wider. I'm going to copy this same text just so that we have something into each of these additional testimonial divs. And now we're going to have some text to work with. And then let's look at these colors here. So how do we know what colors to use? Well, we have some starter files, and if we go to the styleguide.md, it's going to give you layouts and then colors right here. So this is where we're going to find the colors that we need. So if we come down to the colors, we see all of them listed in HSL format, and you can use that in CSS, but it's not my preferred way of doing it. And honestly, I haven't seen a whole lot of developers that use HSL. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to convert these to hex codes, and that way we can work with what I'm comfortable with and probably what you'll see more often. Just as a reminder, this is how I'm doing it. I just typed in RGB to hex, and then you get this tool that Google has, and you can just basically come in here, grab an HSL value, paste it into this box here, and then copy the hex code and replace it here. So that's all I'm doing. All right, I've got these all replaced here. So we've got hex values, a little bit more comfortable for most people to be using. And we've got a couple notes on the text colors, but I think these are mostly related to the text itself, so we'll get there a little bit later. I'm going to drag the style guide down to this bottom portion of our Visual Studio Code screen, just so we can have it as a reference. Now it looks like the background of the entire screen is going to be a light gray. So we'll start with that. If we go to our style.css, in addition to the box sizing, we also want to set margin 0 and padding 0 on everything, just so that we don't have any unintended side effects. So when we click save, you'll see that everything gets smushed together because we just excluded the margin and padding that's by default set on a paragraph element in the browser. And now we'll come down here and we'll say on the body, we want the background color to be, I believe, the light gray or the light grayish blue. We'll see which one looks more similar. So there's the light gray. That is definitely too dark. And there is the light grayish blue, which I think that does match, if my eyes are not playing tricks on me. I think the background here matches pretty well. So I think we got that right. So we got the background covered, and now we can start filling out our containers themselves. So each of them, again, has an individual ID. Let's template those out. So testimonial 1. And then we can copy this 5 times. We may not need all of these, but we'll just have them out here for the start. Or actually, of course, we'll need all of these. They're all different colors. So the first one is this purple, the purple card here. So we need to grab that color from the style guide. I believe the moderate violet is what we're looking for. So we'll come up to testimonial 1 and give it a background color of that. And now when we click save, you should see that background color. Now the next one that we're looking for is, it looks like kind of a darkish gray. So very dark grayish blue. I think that's the one that we want. So we'll come to Testimonial 2 and do the same thing. And then for the rest of these, I don't want to waste your time. I'm just going to go and kind of guess and check until I get the background colors correct on each one of these pieces to this grid. But the one thing I will say before I speed through this is the numbering of these. So we've got them numbered 1 through 5, but you may be wondering which is 1 and which is 5. For reasons that you will find out later as we design this with Flexbox. This top one will be 1, then 2, 3, 4, and then the one on the right is going to be the 5th one. So just know that as I'm going through and styling the backgrounds on each of them. Alright, I've got all of the background colors filled in here. And as you'll see in this mobile design that we're trying to make, there's some room between the edge of the screen and these items within the grid. And what we're going to do to create that is we're going to actually wrap all of these items in one big container. And then we're going to set some padding on that container to bring all of them inwards a little bit. So we'll go to the index.html to do that. And right now, all of these divs are just sitting within the body. But we're going to say we want to create a ID of testimonial grid container. We'll just be very specific with it. Grab the closing div down here and paste it in. So now we want to select this testimonial grid container and put this in our styles. So hashtag, grab the ID, and now we want to set some padding. You can either set it in percentage or pixels. For this, since we're going to be making it responsive, I'm going to start with a percentage. So usually about 2% works pretty well. You can see that you get a little bit of padding there. But of course, when we look at the mobile design and make this bigger, there's a little more padding on the top than there is on the sides. So we can actually use the shorthand padding property to say we want 2% and then maybe 5%, and we'll save that, and I actually got that wrong. So the top and bottom is going to be the first argument, and then the left and right will be the second. Let's bump that up to 3, see what we got. This looks pretty good. So I'll stay with this. I'm fairly satisfied with the spacing that we have here. Something that is really bothering me right now is the text color on these darker backgrounds. So before I get too mad, let's just go ahead and fill that out. So for the first one, we'll need a white text color. So we'll throw that in there. And then we also will just copy this down for Testimonial 2. We're good on 3, good on 5, but we'll also need it on 4. And now you'll see that the text is popping out a little bit better. But it's all crammed together, so we need to space things out just a little bit. As you see in the mobile design, there's not only a little bit of space around the inner content of each grid component, but there's also some space between each grid component. On a mobile device like this, a simple way to add the spacing between them is to just set a margin bottom on each of these. And this looks roughly around 20 pixels, give or take. So instead of trying to set that on each of these, let's create a class selector that grabs all of them. And what we could do is we could come down here and grab each of them one at a time, separated by commas, but that's going to get very tedious. The better way to do it is to come to the HTML, and instead of trying to grab them all by IDs, let's assign a class to each of the grid items. So we'll just say grid item is going to be the class name, and then we can copy that down into each of these divs. And here's a little shortcut within Visual Studio Code. If you find the spot that you want to go in and you hold down the Alt key, It's different on Mac, but on Windows it'd be the Alt key. And then you click in a different place, you'll see there's 2 cursors. So we'll click again, and now there's 3 cursors, and then finally 4. And what you can do is now we can type all at once and paste in those classes that we just created. So there we go. We've got class of grid item in each of these grid items, and now we can come down and just select that and set a margin bottom of 20 pixels. So when we click save, we've got a nice amount of spacing between the items. Furthermore, another similar thing between all of the grid items, if we look at our styles here, is that the padding around the content is the same on each of them. And it looks like, I'm not exactly sure, but it might be somewhere around 20 pixels as well. So we'll start with that and we can tweak it as we go. So we'll set padding of 20 pixels, click save, and now our boxes are looking a whole lot better than they did a few minutes ago. So we are far from done here with the mobile design, but right around this point, once I'm like happy with the general layout, obviously the text isn't right in here, we're missing pieces, but once I'm satisfied and it doesn't look like completely terrible, then that's when I go to the desktop design and start making it responsive, because I want to get the layout correct before I start, adding a bunch of other things in. So what we will do here is we're going to shrink this Visual Studio Code window a little bit, close the editor so we have some more space, and then make this browser window larger so that we can use the Chrome DevTools. And when we bring this down here, I'm going to click this button right here so we can toggle the device toolbar. And now we have the ability to see this at different sizes really quickly without resizing the entire screen. So that'll be helpful as we can actually see the width up here updating live. So that'll be really helpful as we resize on different devices and design for that. So here's about our mobile design. If you just click this bar, you can get a small mobile device. You can click here for medium and here for a large mobile device. So here's the large mobile device, and the reason it shrunk is because we're at 40%. So let's go to maybe 75%. You can see it a little bit better. And then as we resize this, we're getting into the larger desktop devices. I know I had mentioned about 576 pixels for the breakpoint we're going to use. And again, that is because earlier in this course when we talked about responsive design, I just said, let's go ahead and use the Bootstrap CSS framework breakpoints. They're right here, so they go from 576, 768, 992. In our case, we've got 2 designs only, so we're only going to need a single breakpoint for this. Now we just have to decide at what point do we break. So if you just play around with this design and you just look at the text, right around, so we're at 708 pixels wide right now, and this is getting a little bit wide for my liking with this mobile design over here. So I think 576 right about here is going to be just about the widest we'll go for that mobile design, and that's going to be our breakpoint then. To set that breakpoint, we come over to our CSS, we write @media for a media query, and since we're doing mobile first design, we'll set a min width of 576 pixels. So now we open the brackets up, and any styles we put here are going to apply to anything bigger than 576, so all of this right here. And before we get too far, let's go ahead and test it. This is really important as you're coding, whether it's HTML, CSS, JavaScript, or anything else. Do it incrementally. Don't just write a bunch of code and then test it out all at the end. So let's test it out by targeting a p tag and giving it a color of red, something obnoxious, and we'll click save. Right now we're at 444 pixels, so we would not expect this style to apply, but as we go above 576, we would expect all the text to turn red. So let's see if it does, and it does. So that means that our media query is working great. Remember, always put these media queries at the bottom of your CSS, otherwise they may get overwritten by other styles. So our goal here, before we get any further, is once we hit above 576, so when this is turning red, and the reason it's doing that is because I haven't saved yet, but once we get above here, we would expect this layout to look like this desktop design over here. So the question is, how do we do that? And the way that we're going to solve this is with Flexbox. I'm just going to expand this VS Code so that we can really look at the design here. So as I look at this, just by experience alone, I'm thinking to myself that using Flexbox, we're probably going to need to split these into subcontainers. Now there's a lot of different ways that you can do it. As always, there's more than one way to solve the problem. But I'm going to choose the most straightforward and beginner-friendly way of doing this. I'm thinking that there is probably a way that we could take all 4 of these items on the left side, wrap those in a container, and then control the overflow of the container with Flex Wrap, and then size them accordingly. But I'm thinking that might get a little bit complex to try to implement. And by adding just one extra container, we can avoid all of that. So what I'm thinking is that we split the overall layout into 2 containers. So the first container is going to be all 4 of these items right here. And the second container will be this item on the right. By doing this, we can take container 1 on the left and container 2 on the right, and we can display Flex, and they will go side by side next to each other. But that doesn't solve how we lay out these items on the left. So what I would want to do within those containers, so remember we have one container on the left, one on the right, and then the left container we can further divide into 2 other containers. So we'll have a top and a bottom container, and in each of those we will display Flex so that they sit next to each other. And then we can use Flex Basis to make the dimensions of each of these a little bit different. I know this is a little abstract, so let me just show you exactly what I mean. So we'll keep that down here, and this all happens within the HTML itself. So to take these 4 items on the left and wrap them in a container, we just need to find them. So here are the first 4, and all we have to do is go at the top of here and set a container. Now we have to decide what to name it so that we can target it with CSS. Naming things is always difficult. I'm not going to overcomplicate it here. We're just going to call it main left and make that div. And then within main left, like I said, we're going to have a top part and a bottom part. There's a couple ways I could do this, but once again, I'll go very simple, and I'll just say top, and then we'll name the other one bottom. So at this point I've got everything laid out correctly. So we want to grab items 1 and 2, so this one, and put it in that top container right here. So we'll do that. We will just cut these away here and put them there. And then in the bottom, we will take items 3 and 4 and put them there. Now finally, we have Testimonial 5, and I said we're going to make a separate container for that. But lucky enough, we've already wrapped our entire grid within the Testimonial grid container. And if you think about this from a Flexbox perspective, we always have to think container and direct children. Doesn't matter the grandchildren or great-grandchildren, those don't apply in Flexbox. So all we have to know is what is the parent and what direct children does that parent have. This Testimonial grid container has exactly 2 direct children. It has the main left, and then it has the Testimonial 5, which is that, this tall card here on the right. So now that we've got this laid out, let's save it. And I will now bring this back to the left side of the screen so that we can look at it again. And you'll see that on the mobile device, nothing has changed here. We put all these containers, but since we haven't selected them with CSS, there's really no change to the overall layout quite yet. But now this is where the real magic is going to happen. And what we could do is, since we're we're now designing for the desktop. We did mobile first with all of these styles. Now we're doing desktop within the media query. But again, remember, you don't have to put everything within that media query. There can be some shared CSS properties between mobile and desktop designs. So the first style I'll add is going to be the testimonial grid container. We want to do work from the outside in. So we'll go to style.css and we'll put that into our media query. And the only thing we need to do here for the moment is write display flex. And when we click save, you'll see nothing happens here because we're still looking at the mobile device. But as we make this larger, now you see that this the main left container with all 4 of those items go left, and then the last item, testimonial 5, will be pushed off to the right because we've displayed them on the main axis, which is horizontal. Now if you look at this design, obviously this testimonial 5 has much less width than the rest. So we can set that with flex, and I suppose it's probably about 25%. It looks like 20 to 25% of the total width. So let's come to our style.css, and on each item we can set the flex basis. So in this case, we're going to want to grab testimonial 5 and target that with our ID selector. And then we'll say the flex basis for that, we'll start with 20% and see what that looks like. Okay, that's a little bit small. I'm thinking that we'll need maybe 25%. I like that a little bit better, and we can always tweak it as we go. The next thing we have to do is look at these 4 items on the left, and they obviously, the top 2 go next to each other and the bottom 2 go next to each other as well. Therefore, we need to make the top a flex container and the bottom a flex container. So you'll see the ID is top and bottom. So all we need to do is come over here and say top display flex, and then bottom display flex. But we have a little bit of a problem here because they're not taking up the whole height of that main container. So if we go to the index.html, we have the main left container, and we want this right testimonial 5 to be equal in height to these other testimonials. To do this, we need to also turn the main left container into a flex container. So we'll go right here and display flex. And this is not going to look right for a second, because when we do that, it puts everything in a row. But if we change the flex direction of the main left to be column, now it's going to go back and look the same. But now we have control using Flexbox of how those are distributed. So if we look at this main left container, which its direct children are going to be the top and the bottom, which are also flex containers, we can distribute those using the justify content. Since we set the flex direction to column, the main axis is going to be going vertical, and therefore justify content allows us to align on the main axis. We also have the ability to say how large we want these using flex basis. So while top and bottom are flex containers in relation to their children HTML elements, they are flex items in relation to the main left container. So if we come down and set the flex basis to, we'll start with 50% on each of them, and then I'll show you why that's not going to work perfectly. So we'll save that, and now you see that we have these filling up the total height of that main left container. And I was actually wrong. The flex basis of 50% works just fine, because in the mobile version we set the padding, or we set the margin bottom of 20 pixels, so there's already some space between. We'll obviously have to space out horizontally, but we'll do that in just a bit. Now the next question we have to ask is, how do we get these proportions correct with these 4 containers? To do that, we can work directly with the top and bottom, and we can use the flex basis of their children items to do that. So all we have to do is grab, let's see exactly how we need to do this. It looks like these are a complete mirror of each other, so this first one and the fourth one are about equal proportion, and the second and third one are equal proportion. So we know that our percentages are going to work pretty much the same. So to do this, we're going to need to grab testimonial 1 through 4 and put them down in our media query, which is our desktop design. So if we put these at the bottom, remember in our desktop design, these are considered flex items. We can go ahead and get rid of these two properties because they're already defined in our mobile version, which also applies to the desktop as long as we don't override them. So we can get rid of all those. But now we can set a flex basis. So the first one, this purple one, looks like it's got about 75% of the width. So we'll go with 75%. And then that means testimonial 2 is going to have a flex basis of 25% because we want to fill up the whole width of that container. And testimonial 3 is going to have a flex basis of also 25%, and then a flex basis of 75% for that last one. So when we click save, you should see the proportions update pretty nicely here. As we compare this design right here to our desktop design picture, you'll probably notice that it looks a little bit wider overall, and you'll see that there's more room around the entire container. So let's just fix that so that we are not thrown off by these proportions. And the way that we'll do that, I believe we can just add a max width to the entire container. So let's look at our index.html. And our testimonial grid container is probably what we're going to want to select. And we've already got that selected in the media query. So on a larger device, maybe we set the max width of, let's say, looks like this might be like 600 pixels. That's just a rough guess. So that's a little bit narrow. So maybe we'll set the max width to, say, 700 maybe. That looks a little bit better. Let's go up to 750. I think that's kind of in the ballpark. And then to center this, we could use like Flexbox, but honestly, the easier way is this little trick where you set a margin of 0 pixels top and bottom, and then left and right, you give it auto. So it's gonna automatically give the margin to center it. So when we click save, you'll see it all goes to the middle. And now we're starting to see a little bit more proportioned grid here. Now, at this point, I think this is a little bit small, the proportion we've given to that right one. So let's change the flex basis of testimonial 5 to be maybe something like 35%. And then, of course, we need to set the left one to be the same. So we need to set the flex basis on the main left, which is all 4 of these items together. We'll set this to about 70%, I think, and then update this testimonial 5 to be 30%. And I think that looks just a little bit better for us. Once we add some spacing here, it should look a lot better. So to finish this off here, the layout, it looks like there's some spacing between each of these items, horizontally. And there's a few ways that we could do this. Actually, I'm now thinking we might even go like 35, 65 here. And now we have these ones which are squished a little bit. So maybe we need to update this container, give it a bigger max width. Then we'll change the 75, 25. At this point, I'm just like adjusting things until we get generally the right fit. So let's try maybe like a 70, 30. That looks slightly better, but I still think we can go a little bit more. So 65, 35. There we go. I think this looks relatively good. And then now that we've adjusted this, this looks a little bit too big. So we'll claw this one back to 70 and 30. And I think we're looking good here. I think the proportions between this in our design is relatively good. And then of course this bottom one we need to match the top, so we'll just come down and do that real quick. So 65, 35, so this one needs to be updated to 35 and 65, and now our grid is looking really good. Now to get the spacing horizontally, you'll see that there's these little gutters here. So right now we don't have any spacing horizontally. We could do this with margin, as we kind of did vertically with that margin, but I'm going to try to apply our Flexbox skills to make this happen, which is a totally valid way to do it as well. So the first one we have to take care of is the main left container, which surrounds all 4 of these, and then testimonial 5 here on the right. Right now we have a flex basis of 30% on this far right and 70% on the main left container, so it's split in 2. But if we reduced those by a couple percentages and then we aligned them with space between them, we could add that little vertical gutter in there. So what I'll do is I'll take the main left container and just bring it down to say 68%. So now we have about 2% empty space within the container. So let's save that, and you'll see there's no space because it's kind of added at the end. It's kind of invisible here on the right. But if we come up to the testimonial grid container, and what we do is we justify content, because remember, the main left with all 4 of those items and the testimonial 5 on the right are aligned on a main axis which goes horizontal because the flex direction is set to row by default. So justify content allows us to align those within there. And all we have to say is space between. And when we do that, you'll see that there's a little space added there because we added some extra empty space and then we spaced them out between. We can do the same exact thing with these flex items here too. So the top flex container, the flex basis is 50%, or actually I'm not doing this right. So the top and bottom are going to be the flex containers. So let's just set the justify content on here to be space between to start off. All right, and we'll save that, and we won't see any changes because currently the flex basis equals 100%, so there's no space to add between. But if we reduce, we'll just reduce testimonial 1 to 63%, so we have 2% left over once again, and we'll save it, and now we have that little space of 2% added in there as well. Now, of course, 2% on a large container versus 2% on a much smaller container is going to equal a different pixel width. So as you see in the design, the little gutter here between this testimonial 5 on the right and all 4 of these on the left, that vertical gutter is a little bit wider than the vertical gutters that we just added to these containers right here. So you see how to do it with Flexbox. If you're okay with that fact, then you can just leave it as we have it. But what I'm going to do, just for demonstration purposes, is I'm going to undo everything that we just did. So we'll set everything back to their original percentages. We'll remove the justify contents and save it. And now we're back to this place where we have no space between. And a really simple way that we could do this is we could just look at all of the flex items or all of the grid items here on the left. We can just add a margin to the right of, say, 20 pixels, and it will be equal across the board. So if we look at our index.html, we have all of these individual items with a class of grid item, but we don't want to add the margin right to this last testimonial. So one way that we could do that is we could look at the main left container, which has these 4 items, and then we can select all descendants with a class of grid item, so it only selects those 4. So I'll show you what I mean here. I guess we'll put this up here right under main left, and we'll say main left is the parent that we want to look at, and then we want to grab all grid item descendants of that. And now what we can do, let me just show you what we're selecting first. So we'll set a color of red so that the text turns red, and we'll click Save. And now you can see all of these left four grid items have red text, but we've excluded the right one with this CSS selector. That's exactly what we want. So we'll add a margin to the right of 20 pixels, and you're going to see that this just gets spaced out really nicely automatically. And that is, it's a little much. Maybe let's go with 15 pixels. And that is exactly how we would add that spacing on the right naturally. And now it's equal between all of them. At this point, the overall structure of our grid looks very good. And now that I'm looking at it one more time, it seems that this right one is still a little bit too wide. And I apologize for going back and forth here, trying to teach and see how to do this at the same time, so it's a little bit tough. So let's bring this back to 25% on Testimonial 5 and 75 on the main left container. I think this looks good, and I really hope I don't change my mind on that again. I might, but as of right now, this looks very similar. And the cool thing is, if we resize this down to mobile, so once we hit 576 pixels, it should break and boom, we have our mobile design. So we don't have to update anything on the mobile side of things. We just made this desktop design and it's pretty much responsive. Now the one thing you'll notice is as we shrink it, these get shrunk a little bit. So it may not look perfect, say on like a tablet, but it should work okay. You could always add an additional breakpoint if you wanted to adjust those flex basis numbers so that it looks better on tablet, but I'm not going to worry about that here because I think it would just be distracting from the main lessons. All right, so we have got our layout done. It is responsive, and now we should be able to just go in and look at this entire design here and start adding in all of these components and styling them out. Before we do that though, I'd like to clean up our CSS a little bit because at the moment we are duplicating a lot of our CSS rules. So this is what we would call kind of refactoring. So you write the code out, you don't really worry about doing it perfectly the first time, but then you kind of edit and you iterate on it and make it a little bit cleaner. So what you'll see is we've written this rule of display flex several different times. So what we can do is we can take all of these IDs where we're writing that display flex and put it into one single CSS rule. Some might say this is not worth doing, but I think it is. It's nice to break out our code a little bit. So we want to select our testimonial grid container and display flex. Let me just write the rule first. And then of course we want to select more than just the testimonial grid. So what else uses flex? We have the main left, so we'll copy that in there. So main left, top and bottom. So those are all going to display flex, and now we can get rid of all of those individual rules on each of them. Click Save, it should look the same. Down here we have these four flex items, all set with flex basis percentages that are very similar. So let's group this together. Let's take testimonial 3, combine it with that rule, and delete all of this. And we'll take testimonial 4, combine it with that rule, and delete this last one. Save it, should get the same thing. Top and bottom now both have a flex basis of 50%, and that's the only rule. So we don't need them broken out separately. We can just bring those together and delete that rule. Click Save, should be the same. And then I'm going to take all of our flex rules and just kind of group them together here. So let me just put those here. Okay, so now we have all of our CSS grouped up a little bit better, and we can start working on adding the content. I'm going to shrink this screen, and we'll go ahead and close the dev tools. And we'll just work on this first on the mobile design so that we have some more screen real estate, and then we'll check it on desktop to make sure everything is working. So we'll open up our File Explorer and index.html along with our placeholder text, because this is what we're going to actually be putting in to all of these containers. And I'm just going to look at the desktop design. I know we're doing mobile over here, but it's just bigger so we can see it better. I'll go through the first one with you, and then the rest of them are going to be pretty much exactly the same, so I'll let you do those on your own and I'll just speed through it. So with this first card right here, now we have this big quotation. We're going to worry about that totally last. We're not going to worry about that yet. The content itself, it looks like we have a picture, we have a name, we have, this says verified graduate, so they're the status of that person. And then we have the main testimonial and the secondary testimonial. So just looking at this immediately, we need an image tag. We need a paragraph tag, another paragraph tag. Looks like maybe an H4 tag, and then another paragraph tag. So let's get the picture first. This first one is Daniel Clifford. So we're going to need that image, and that's been provided to us. If we go to Images folder, you should see image daniel.jpg. So we can finally start to replace this. So we're on Testimonial 1 right here. And we're first going to put in an image. So we'll use the Emmet abbreviation, click Tab. And the source that we want is going to be the relative path. And then we'll say images. And then we want image-Daniel. And then the alt attribute, this is for accessibility. You should always put this in here. So Daniel profile picture, just a description of what that is. Click Save. You'll see this image come in to our first grid item. We now need to write in his name and verified graduate. So let's do that. We'll just use a P tag. So Daniel Clifford, verified graduate. There we go. We've got those added in there. Now we have to go find the text. So it says, I received a job offer mid-course. Okay, so there's our Daniel. So here's our first piece of text. We'll put that in the P tag right here. So there's that text, and then finally we'll just want one more P tag. And actually, no, this will not be a P tag. Let's just set that as an H4. I think that's roughly what we would want here. That looks okay. We can always switch it later. Then finally, we have this last piece of text. So this is the longer testimonial that we'll put in the P tag right here. All sorts of formatting issues, so I'm just gonna get this all on one line here. It doesn't really matter, but I'm gonna just do this anyway. Okay, so we've got our first card done, and like I said, you can go through and figure out how to do the rest of them. It's the same exact pattern for each of the different testimonial cards. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna just take this entire structure and I'm gonna come down and replace each item with it. When we click Save, you'll see that it's all looking the same, and then now we can just switch the individual parts. So the second testimonial, if we open up the desktop design, it's going to be Jonathan. So based on the image names here, we have image Jonathan. So we really can just come into find the second one here, so testimonial 2, replace the link here, click Save. Now we have Jonathan in here, and then you just update the rest of the text. So I'm going to speed through this, and I'll see you when I'm done. All right, we are done, and you can see that I've got all of the text and images in here. Now it's just a matter of styling these. If you look at the main design, they're all about the same. So we have the image in a circle on the left with the name and the verified graduate right under it, and then the actual testimonial below. So it makes no sense to try to target each of these individually. We'll just set a common class among all of them and then style it one time. Let's start with the image and the name to the right of the image. The first thing that we need to do, because how I see this is we've got the image on the left and then the name and verified graduate stacked on top of each other. So to get those next to each other, a great way to do it is Flexbox. So the image will be flex item number 1, and then we'll make a container around the name and the verified graduate, which will be flex item number 2. To do that, we just come to the HTML. We'll go to the first one here, and we'll come right above the image, and what should we name this? We'll just call it a class of header. And then within header, we're going to have the image and then another container with the other text. So I'm going to call that container header text. Okay, so now all we have to do is drop in the image up top and then these two p tags in this container down here. I'm going to split our style.css to the right here in Visual Studio Code so we can see both. And as we look at the header and the header text, we can come down, since this applies to both mobile and desktop, we'll just write it up in the mobile first section where it applies to pretty much everything. And we'll just put it at the bottom. We want to target header, which is going to be display flex. Automatically, when we click save, you're going to see it jumps on to the correct line. And then these are lined up. So if you look at this, the picture and the text, they're like on the same horizontal axis. So the way that we get that to happen is align items. So we're aligning items on the cross axis to be center. So now that's going to work. And then of course we need to grab the image. So from the header container, we want to grab all images, and we want the border radius to be, it's just a trick to make circular pictures, we want that to be 50%. So you see now we have a circle picture, and then we want the margin right to be, let's call it 5 pixels. Actually that's not enough, so let's do 10 pixels. Now you can see there's a little space between those. Lastly, we need some space under this header container. So we'll come back up to header, set a margin bottom of maybe 20 pixels, and that will space us out from this top header container to the text under it. Now, of course, this has not applied to the rest of the testimonials, but we will follow the same exact process. As long as we keep the same class on them, these CSS styles should apply just fine. So I'm going to speed through this so you don't have to watch me do it completely. I'm just going to go and create this exact structure below for each of them. And probably should have done this the first time around, but whatever, we'll get through it. Okay, so I got that done, and that's kind of a good lesson there. You usually want to finish like one iteration, so one card, get it all correct, and then apply the styles to the rest. I didn't do that, so had to pay for it with some extra time. The next thing I'm going to do is space out these two pieces of text. So the first one's an H4, the second one is a paragraph tag. So we can select that with our styles pretty easily. All we have to do is look at any grid item class and select the H4s and add a margin bottom. So we'll say grid item H4, and we'll set a margin bottom of 20 pixels maybe. I think that looks okay. So 20 pixels, yeah, that looks pretty good. We're getting close to the finish line here. The next thing you'll notice is there's rounded corners on each of these cards. That'll be pretty easy to apply. So let's go find our grid item style, which selects all the grid items, and we'll set a border radius of around 5 pixels maybe. That'll make those rounded corners, so that looks good. There's also a little bit of a drop shadow on each of these. or at least the white ones, but we'll just go ahead and put it on each of them just for simplicity. So any grid item is going to get a box shadow. You can go to a box shadow tool online. This is just the standard that I always put in there. Is a black color with 20% opacity, and then I kind of tweak these values right here until I get roughly what I want. So you can see there's a little box shadow there. I might spread this out a little bit more. It's not exactly what we're looking for, but it's pretty close, and I'm not too concerned about getting this verbatim to the design. The next big piece to this is the font. So in the style guide, if we go here to the style guide, it's going to tell you what font you need to use. So for typography, the body copy is 13 pixels. We haven't set that yet. Actually, let's do that really quick. So for grid items, you could set this at multiple levels, but for grid items, we'll set the font size to be 13 pixels. Makes it a lot smaller here for us. And then for grid item H4s, we'll set the font size back up. So we'll say maybe 1.2 rem. So that's the root element is going to be the HTML, which I believe is set default to 16 pixels. So that will make it a much bigger text. And I think that looks relatively good. Decent proportions there, so I'm okay with that. And now we have to actually change the font itself. So in the style guide, it says that we need the Barlow semi-condensed font from Google Fonts. I happen to have this open already. Let me expand the screen. And all you have to do is select the styles that you want. So we will do that, and it looks like we need 500 and 600 font weights. So we will go grab medium, which is 500, and 600, which is semi-bold. Now it's saying that we just need to put this link in our HTML document, so we'll copy that. Should be good on this, so let me resize the screen real quick. And now all we need to do with this is put it into our HTML. So we put this in the head, and we can put it right by our style sheet link. So I think usually you're supposed to put this after your style sheet so that this applies. I'm not entirely certain if that matters a ton. Let's save it. By default, it's not going to be using it because we haven't enabled it. So we'll have to come back to our styles.css, and in the body, this might be where we put the font family, and this is where we'll go to the rules here, and we can just paste in this CSS rule actually. So we'll be using Barlow semi-condensed with a fallback of sans serif. Save that, and you can see all of the font is looking a lot closer to our demo here. You'll notice that these white cards have a gray text rather than the black text we're giving it, so let's update that. I believe we have a rule for this already. So we can actually condense Testimonial 5 and 3 into one because they have the same styles. And then the font color that we need, if we go to the style guide, is probably this light gray, I'm thinking. Nope, that's a little too light. So we'll try the dark grayish blue. And I think that's a little bit closer. May not be exact, but I'm thinking it's close enough. It's better than the black that we had before. Now the smaller text has a little bit less opacity than the main text, and then we also need to set the font weight. So let's look at the style guide. It says for the typography, or note for the text colors, the verified graduate, okay, we're not ready for that yet. Review paragraphs inside quotes have the same color but are 70% opacity. So in our design here, we have a couple different P tags. So we have the name, verified graduate, and then the testimonial down here. So if we just set the font weight of a P tag and the opacity of a P tag for all of them, that will apply to mostly what we want, because we want this testimonial to have 70% opacity and probably verified graduate as well. And then we can specifically override that opacity style to be 100% for the name later. So let's go ahead and do that. So we'll see if we have something for this already. So we have grid item. So we'll just set the grid item P tags. So any P tag within the grid item, we want to set the opacity to 70%. And then for the name, let's just add a class so we can use the Alt key to come into all of the P tags with the name. Just holding down Alt. And we can give it a class name. And then we can come down into the name selector and give it an opacity of 100%. Maybe not the most effective solution, but it works. And we probably need to select it with header to be more specific than our grid item P, because header and name, that's two class selectors, is more specific than grid item P, which is a class and a tag selector. So this one takes precedence and we'll override it. Now I think we just need to tweak a few things with the text here. Not a whole lot. We might want to make the name just slightly larger than that default 13 pixels. So we can come to that rule that we just created. So the name, and we'll say the font size is going to be 1.1 rem. Actually, that's going to be way too large. How about 1 rem, so 16 pixels. That looks better. If you open this up, you might see a little border around these pictures too. So while we're here, we can look at the header image, and we can give it a border of 1 pixel, solid, maybe purple. I think some of them are different, but let's just go with purple on all of them. You can see that little border that we have around there. You can tweak that how you like it. Lastly, I think the font weights look okay, but they did tell us to import weights of 500 and 600, so we should probably explicitly set those. So on the grid item H4s, we'll give a font weight of 600. Looks about the same, so not a huge change. For the most part, I think I'm happy with the design we have. It's not absolutely perfect, but it's pretty close. And more importantly, we've gone through a lot of the concepts that we've covered in the previous videos, which is always fun to apply those. Leave a comment if I missed anything. I think the only thing remaining is this big quote up here. And there's a couple ways you could approach this. I do not believe there's any assets for this. Like, this is not an image. Actually, it is. So this is an SVG. And we could use this SVG. I don't want to get too far into CSS and SVGs. It's like a whole other topic, but I'll go ahead and just quickly put it in and show you how to do it. So what we can do is this background pattern quotation SVG. If we click on it, it's just a bunch of numbers, but we can actually put this into an image, I believe. So if we come to our index.html, let me get this CSS collapsed a little bit. And it's obviously on the main card, the purple card here, so number 1. We can pretty much put it wherever we would like here within this main card. So let's make an image, and then the source is going to be images, and then background pattern quotation. So now you see that quote is already in there. That's nice. Now we just need to absolutely position this because it's in that weird spot. So it's like kind of randomly up there in the top right corner. Let's give it an ID. So we'll give it the quote ID, And then we come over to our CSS and we will select quote and we'll say position absolute. And what that is going to do is position it relative to, I believe, the viewport by default. Let's see how that works. So from the right, we want it to be 20 pixels roughly. Okay, yeah, so it's relative to the viewport. We want it relative to this container itself. So to do that, we need to set the testimonial 1 container to be position relative. And once we do that, that quote will come in correctly. Come down to quote, it should be probably more like 30 pixels from the right, and then from the top, it is pretty much flush with the top, so we'll do 0. And you can see that gets us a little bit closer. And as we resize this, it's obviously going to change that a little bit. So maybe from the right, we go like 3%. I'm just going to experiment around with this until we get it right. Maybe like 7%. That's closer. Let's just ramp it up to 15. Okay, I like that. I think 15 is pretty good. And like I said, it's flush with the top, so that's good. And then finally, as we resize this, I know this doesn't look amazing. We're just kind of in that middle state where it's like, this is like bigger than a mobile device, but smaller than a tablet. So you're really not going to see this on any device for the most part. So like here is about where you're going to start seeing it. And it looks like the quote is like a little bit above that text. And in our actual design here, it's showing it as behind the text, like overlapping. That's partially because of the spacing that we've given it, so I'm not overly concerned about it. But as we resize it and it does kind of overlap text, we want that to go behind everything. So to do that, we need to go to the styles. We need to set the z index equal to like -1. Or actually, let's set this z index to 1, and then on the testimonial 1, we will set the z index to be 0. So it's above the testimonial card, but then we want it to be below the testimonial text. So we'll set the z index of the header to 3. I think that might get us there, maybe not. There we go. We just need to set it to position relative so that the z index applies. And now it should be going behind any text and stuff like that. So should be good there. And I think our design is pretty much complete. So as you can see, like we could spend the next hour or 2 hours trying to get this to look exactly like the example here. Just if you're curious, I took a second to try to figure this out fully, exactly how we can get it to look like this, and didn't come all the way there, but I did get it somewhat close. So I put a max width of 1440 according to the style guide here where it says the desktop is 1440. And then I set the testimonial 5 and main left containers to 80 and 20% respectively. So this looks okay. I think it's not exact, like I said, but it's a little bit closer. Let me know in the comments if I missed anything, but as we resize this, it should be responsive. We have this like middle state where it's a little bit weird, but honestly, trying to perfect that is just going to be a lot of tedious tweaks that you can kind of do on your own if you want. But the main goal here has been accomplished. On desktop, it looks like this, and on mobile, it looks like this, where we have everything stacked on top of each other. So now at this point, we're going to take this local host that nobody can see, and we're going to deploy this to GitHub Pages so that you can pass it off as a link and show off your project. So the way that we'll do that, let's close out everything here so we have a clean workspace. So what we can do is we can open up source control. This is embedded within Visual Studio Code. And what we can do is initialize a repository. And this can be done on the command line too, but I think we should, since we haven't learned Git yet, and I don't expect you to understand any of this quite yet, might as well use the visual interface. So from here, we initialize the repository, and it says Control Enter to commit on master. So we can write a message, just say first commit and then Control Enter. We're going to stage all our changes and commit them directly. Yes. And I'm actually set up with GitHub already, so it may ask you to go through some authorization where you have to sign in to GitHub, so go ahead and do that if you have to. Now what we have to do is create a new repository on our GitHub. So if you don't have an account, sign up for GitHub. You'll need it for the rest of your developer life. Click New Repository, and we'll just say Testimonial Grid Front-End Mentor Challenge Solution. Very long repository name. You don't need to make it that long. And we'll just create the repository, make it public. Not too worried about initializing all of this stuff. Now from here, you're just going to copy the HTTPS link, come back to Visual Studio Code, click these three dots, click Remote, add Remote, and then we're going to put in that URL. From there, we should be good. I think we want to push it to the main branch, so let me see what we're working with here. Yep, so we need to push to main, but this is just the name we're giving it, so origin. We're just linking up our code here to the GitHub repository, and again, you don't need to understand this. We're just trying to get it deployed here. So now we're going to click push. Okay. Then let's check it out here. We'll refresh, and you'll see that we have all of these files that we just created from Visual Studio Code here on our repository. Right now, we don't have it deployed to GitHub Pages. The way that we can do that, we can do it here, or we can do it within Visual Studio Code, but quite honestly, doing it within the repository is relatively straightforward, since we already have index.html in the main root of the directory. So we'll go to master, find or create a branch, and type GitHub Pages. And it says create branch GitHub Pages from master, which is exactly what we want to do. This is master, what we're looking at right now. So we'll create that branch. And now let's go back to our main repository. And I believe it should publish this to GitHub Pages in the next minute or two. It doesn't happen like instantaneously, because what it's actually doing is taking our code files and putting them on GitHub Pages, which is just another server, and then serving them over our GitHub URL. Let's refresh the page. Looks like our environments has been set up now, so we can click on the main repository, we can click GitHub Pages, and then view the deployment. And you can see that what we just created is now live. And this link up here, you can copy and share with someone else. And as we resize it, it of course is going to resize to that mobily responsive width, and then desktop responsive. And that's pretty much it. Let me know if I missed anything in the comments. If you enjoyed this, be sure to give it a like. It really helps out the channel. And in the next couple of lessons, we're going to learn all about CSS Grid as a part of the Full Stack Developer series. And then we will build another front-end mentor challenge that's a little bit trickier using CSS Grid, Flexbox, and pretty much everything else that we've learned, including JavaScript. So make sure you are subscribed and have notifications turned on to get those updates in the future. And until next time, I'll see you later.